All right, so we are back live again. Sorry, you guys, for that technical issue. We had the screen locked, so it just was not rotating to the right direction, but you gotta love it when we do our live events. Always trying to combat the technical challenges. So again, we are live from the South Rim of Grand Canyon National Park, and today is Wednesday, September 16th, and we are here celebrating the 12th annual Celebration of Art. So right now you guys are getting views of James McGrew, and he is painting out at Powell Point. So hello again, James.
Hi.
Do you mind sharing with everyone what your inspiration is today and kind of what frame you're working with?
My inspiration today, when we came out here, I really had no idea what I was going to end up painting, and I came out here yesterday to kind of scout the scene, and it looked totally different. It was really clear, really deep atmospheric blues receding into the distance, and today it's super smoky from all those fires in California and Oregon that have drifted over this way today. So I came out and looking all around, I just was really captivated, looking directly into the west and looking at the layers of depth through the atmosphere and the silhouettes of the ridgelines, creating that sense of real scale and depth of the Grand Canyon. So that's what I'm going to try to capture here in about an hour or two.
And so, again, for those of you guys that are just joining in, my name is Alyssa Ojeda, and I'm the Marketing and Public Relations Manager for Grand Canyon Conservancy. And so James and I are just outside of Powell Point, and we have a nice 20-foot lavalier mic cable, so that way we can practice social distancing, and we do have our masks as well, but we are tucked away from other people, so that way James can paint in peace and have a nice perimeter around him. So as you guys join in, please feel free to comment with your hometown. Let us know where you're watching from. And if you have any questions that you have for myself or for James that you want us to answer live, put those in the comments too, and we will make sure we ask them to James. So, James, do you mind sharing, how long have you been an artist?
As long as I can remember. I first started painting as a little kid, received pastels at the age of 8, and then my dad gave me oils that he used in college when I was 10. And I've just always been interested in art and drawing and painting, but professionally, full-time as an artist for about almost 25 years.
Ian, what would you say is your day job outside of being an artist?
This is actually
your day job before being an artist.
I've actually been really fortunate that I've been painting as long as since college. Actually, I had my first solo gallery exhibit in college, and so I do. Also, since the same time frame, I started working as a summer seasonal interpretive park ranger in Yosemite National Park in 1996, and I've kept that balance ever since, doing interpretive programs during the summertime and painting full time the rest of the year, and photography as well.
I do feel like you have that unique perspective of actually working within a park and that connection to the National Park Service, but then using that as a source of inspiration. Do you have a favorite time of day that you usually like to go out and paint, since you are privy to some of that national park access?
The times when there's the least number of people out, and that's not to avoid the people, it's just the time that people aren't really out as much, but which is really early and really late in the day. So the last light, the last couple hours of the day, like we're getting right now, or the first couple hours of the day. So every day I'm up before sunrise, trying to be out painting when the sun comes up. And I'm usually finishing up about 10 when people are usually starting to show up. And again in the evening, but I mean, I'll paint any time of day, and depending on where I am and what the scene is. And like in Yosemite, the cliffs are so high and I'm often looking up. I can paint midday, looking at a backlit texture of a waterfall. Last night and tonight I'll be finishing up a nocturne in the middle of the night. The Milky Way, Saturn and Jupiter, Sagittarius right now are right up in the sky together, and I was creating a scene with El Tovar in the foreground, the lights of the hotel, and the Milky Way right up over the top. So that's just in the middle of the night, just set up a little clamp and a light above my easel, and I can paint anytime.
So again, as we're starting to get some more viewers on, we are live from the South Rim, and if you guys have any questions and Celebration of Art artists, please feel free to put those in the comments. Otherwise, we're going to hang out so you guys can get views of the South Rim, watch James paint, and then we're also going to answer some questions along the way. So this is, really relevant in the fact that you are coming from an area with the fires. How has this time affected your connection with nature and being able to get outside?
It's been tough. In Yosemite the last few weeks, that I was in the park was really difficult, as we had fires really not close to us in Yosemite. There were two small lightning ignition fires in the park that were crawling and creeping but producing very little smoke and doing what we really love to see fires doing, which is restoring that native ecosystem and opening up the health of the forest, and doing everything that we really like to see. But then those fires started middle of August throughout California, and that produced smoke that made it really tough to get out and hike and paint and do the stuff that I normally like to do. And then right before this event, I was in Oregon. So I live in Oregon, just outside of Portland in Lake Oswego most of the year, and that's where my studio is. And just as I was getting ready to come down to the Grand Canyon Celebration of Art, we had some huge fires erupt right near us and put us under an evacuation. Oregon has 3 levels of evacuation. We were under a level 1, meaning be prepared, monitor emergency airways, and get ready to potentially leave. And so that was changing my plans pretty rapidly there. And so I didn't come down here for a couple extra days. And then as I did drive, I drove all the way out through eastern Oregon, through Idaho, Utah, and the smoke was so thick. There were areas where there was only 200 yards of visibility driving. And needless to say, for somebody who loves being outside, hiking and painting every day, it's been a little bit tougher.
And as you guys might be able to pick up on a little bit of today, unfortunately some of the smoke followed James out here. We have a little bit of haze just coming into the canyon, but it creates for this really interesting effect and something that gives it just a little bit more depth than usual. And so it is about 85 degrees today. It's a little bit warm, but it has really minimal wind, which has been great as well. And James, do you mind just sharing how many Celebration of Art events have you participated in?
I think this is the 8th one. Let's see, 2013 was my first year that I participated.
And I was just saying, do you feel like you've learned anything from your first one to now your 8th one?
I definitely. I'm always learning. I think any artist really should be trying to learn throughout their entire life, because as we're painting, I mean, there's only so many things you can really understand until you get to a different threshold, a different level, to be able to see things that you didn't even notice before. And so I think, especially as a full-time professional artist where I'm painting every day, there's not a day that goes by that I don't learn something new. Or every time I go into a museum, or right now it's not going into museums, but looking at work online and just thinking about things differently, I'm constantly learning and finding new places, new perspectives of everything that I paint. Always trying to tell a story and finding different things with each time I'm painting.
And I think we might have hit it on this earlier, but one question we have is, what type of medium do you prefer to paint in?
I'm using oils, and I've used all sorts of different mediums, but oils is my preferred because it's the most versatile, and I can keep all my paint wet in the palette here. These are all M. Graham oil paints. They're made in Oregon using California walnut oil, which is one of the most fluid oils. That's a drying oil that's used for oil paint. It yellows the least and maintains rich blues and bright whites for basically longer than any other type of paint. And it's relatively fluid, more fluid than any other type of oil paint, so you can have a lot more pigment load into it, so it creates a much more permanent, much more long-lasting and brilliant paint than any other type of paint. Plus, it's a great company, and they make all their paints with the artist and the environment in mind in terms of toxicity and recycling everything and locally sourcing their materials. And in fact, I used to use lots of lead and cobalt and manganese and cadmiums in my palette, but I've eliminated all my toxic pigments, and so everything I have on the palette here is non-toxic. So should there ever be an accident where I spill something, or I don't ever have to worry about it getting into the environment, or also dealing with those chemicals myself for health purposes.
And I'm sure just wind is probably one of the biggest challenges as being an artist, and that could be something that accidentally knocks or blows your easel down. And again, going back to that, the paint and the dirt, and having something with low toxicity is really nice for the environment.
Yeah, this easel's fallen over multiple times. In fact, just thinking back, this particular paint box, this is made by Open Box M in Wyoming, and the tripod, it gets a carbon fiber tripod, and the whole thing went over a cliff in Yosemite a few years back and fell about 400 feet. I climbed down through poison oak and everything and managed to recover it, and it was just 2 weeks before the plein air convention in Tucson where I was set to do a stage demo and field presentations. And so I called the guy that makes the box and I said, can I buy one? He says, I can't make them that fast, but if you send me that one, I'll repair it for you. And he repaired it, saved all my original palette, and had it back to me in time for the presentation at plein air convention. So.
Well, that was a godsend. Oh my gosh.
2 weeks later, or a few years later, I was in Zion and been hiking and painting all day and only slept 4 hours in the car on the way out there the night before that. And I accidentally backed over the box. And I called him back up and I said, by the way, remember that box? And he just started laughing. He said, you and that box have some stories, don't you? But here it is again, still using it. It's amazing.
So obviously we are a little bit biased to Grand Canyon, but what are some other interesting places that you've been able to paint at?
I really focus a lot on a lot of our western national parks, a lot of the early parks, and more unique and dramatic scenery. And so Grand Canyon, Zion, and Yosemite, Yellowstone, Tetons. Also, I love the parks in Hawaii, Hawaii volcanoes and Haleakala. And I will probably paint Bryce on the way back up north after this trip. And so, but I've been painting in the Grand Canyon, plein air, almost longer than almost any other park except for Yosemite. And in fact, in 2003 was the first time I was plein air painting in the Grand Canyon. And I was with my family, my daughter, who's now 23, Jacqueline, and she was 7 at the time. And then my younger daughter, Janelle, who is 17, was about 3 months prior to being born at the time that we were here. And hiked down the South Kaibab Trail and had a pair of peregrine falcons fly by us. And we saw multiple California condors on that trip. And I did a handful of paintings. And that was the first time I remember really getting on an airplane and flying to a national park with a whole paint setup specifically for the purpose of a lot of painting and of course a family trip together. But you know, I was painting early and late every day, and then we were hanging out together during the day. And so Grand Canyon has a really special background for me, going back for a long time.
Do you have some favorite viewpoints that you usually like to come check out or always try to paint from?
I do have my favorites, but they change. And I also try to mix things up and find new perspectives. Powell is definitely one of my favorite spots. And here we are right now. And I've painted every year that I've been here, I've painted something from this spot. And I just love the drama and the depth that you get in the canyon from this area. But also Mojave, Hopi Points are spectacular and the areas around them. The main points themselves are often kind of crowded. So especially like right now in COVID, I've been avoiding the main high-use areas, and if I have to, I'm wearing a mask, of course, around people. But generally speaking, I've been painting a little bit off the beaten path, just beyond the main views so that I can better social distance and find that kind of peace and quiet. Normally, though, I'm happy to paint in front of people because it does generate interest and allows people to see what we're doing, and it's also, I think, really important to share the legacy that artists have in our national parks like Grand Canyon. And a lot of these early parks probably wouldn't be here, wouldn't be protected had it not been for early artists. In Yosemite, the very first paintings were done by Thomas Ayers and then Albert Bierstadt in conjunction with photography from Carlton Watkins. And then that became helped lead to the signing of the Yosemite Grant in 1864. And then later, John Muir hired Thomas Moran and Thomas Hill and William Keith to produce images to go with his writings as he was campaigning to make it a national park. And in the case of Zion, you have Frederick Dellenbaugh and Moran leading to awareness. In the case of Yellowstone, our first official national park in 1872, Thomas Moran's paintings were highly instrumental in persuading Congress in its preservation. And then with Grand Canyon here, we have those early paintings of Moran, and then as we got a bit later too, Gunnar Vidforce and all these other artists that were really instrumental in spreading awareness, and not just for the public, but persuading legislation. So congressional legislation, or in the case of places that became national monuments first, like Grand Canyon, persuading presidential's legislation signing with the Antiquities Act, and then later becoming national parks. And so it's a hugely important legacy that I think we have the opportunity, and it's great to be able to share that with the public while we're out painting as well.
Well, thank you so much for that history, because I think the concept of art in the parks has been a long tradition, and it's definitely something that we, as far as Grand Canyon Conservancy, trying to bring that back with Celebration of Art. Looking at a couple of those artists that you mentioned, have any of them inspired you throughout the years?
Oh, all of them, for sure. For so many different reasons. Thomas Moran, just with his really powerful, very creative use of things and moving things around, and Albert Bierstadt. I grew up looking at Bierstadt paintings in areas that I was really in love with growing up as a kid around Yosemite, and just produced some amazing nocturnes that were really inspirational. The power and the energy of Moran's pieces. Thomas Hill is the artist that I think that best captured the West relatively accurately, but also conveyed the power and the energy and the emotion and light all at the same time, using a combination of realism and impressionism and really Barbizon school. And so all those artists really are important and influential. And one of the really great things about, in fact, I think the most important thing about this event, I mean, it's great to be here, it's great to be able to produce work, but the whole purpose of this show is raising money to build a museum here on the south rim of the Grand Canyon as a permanent art venue, because all these historic paintings that were so important, so instrumental in the establishment of Grand Canyon are in government archives, but they're not on public display. And the same is true for Native American artifacts, early cultural history of the park, and there's so much rich history here, and so the public doesn't really have a permanent opportunity to view that. However, we're raising money through the production of these paintings and then the sale of the pieces to build that.
So I do just want to give a shout out to some of the folks that are joining us today. So thank you, Kirby from Jacob Lake, and we've had Judith from Alberta, Canada, and I believe we had someone else from Australia that have joined us. So thank you guys again for tuning in. We are live from the South Rim, and let me flip it around. I'm kind of on a slanted hill right here, so I have to keep bending over. And so again, my name is Alyssa Ojeda, and James McGrew is painting from Powell Point today, and this is all towards Celebration of Art. And so Celebration of Art is an annual tradition to really bring together artists at the community, and then, as James mentioned, to raise funds to hopefully help go towards a dedicated art venue here on the South Rim. So the painting that James is actually painting now will probably be one of the ones that will be available for sale at the end of the week, and we'll have that website up actually on Friday of next week. So you guys can purchase any of the paintings that we've been showing throughout this week, as well as he still has an intent to purchase form for his studio piece, as well as bids for his online auction piece. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to comment, and I'm keeping track of them. And we are a good 8 feet apart over here, so we're practicing physical distancing. So James does not have a mask on. I just took mine off so that way I could smile at you guys. And so I just want to say we appreciate you guys continuing to follow along, and we will be doing more lives throughout the week as well. And coming back on Friday, we'll have a full artist paint out, so that way you guys can meet more artists, and we'll be sharing some interviews from those as well. So I'm going to flip you back around so that you guys can see the beautiful views. And again, for those of you that did also just join, it's a little bit hazy here today. We're getting some smoke in. It's kind of starting to fill the canyon. So right now we are actually looking west towards the canyon from the South Rim, and we are out at Powell Point. All right. So James, just for fun, since it's been kind of a wild year, any videos, shows that you've binge watched that you just would recommend?
I can't say that I really ever binge watch anything. I don't really watch a lot of TV. The only TV that I actually own is a 4K monitor that I have in my studio that I hook to my computer as references when I'm trying to paint a grand landscape like this, and the little references just don't quite cut it, so I use large, high-resolution 50 megapixel files on a big screen, but it's not hooked up to any kind of television. However, I have been having some fun watching some shows with my daughter, Janelle especially, and we have a few shows that we do watch kind of binge level, I guess, a few in a row at a time. And I think we've watched every episode of Psych, and definitely our favorite overall show. But more recently, The Good Place and Parks and Rec has been pretty fun too. She just got me watching that one recently, and
It's a little bit relevant for you, maybe.
that was kind of yeah. And of course, I watch a lot of nature shows as well. I was watching some the other day about bird brains and bird intelligence, and those are just amazing. We're having fun watching those. And actually, those kind of turned into a bit of a binge watch. Watched several in a row on Netflix, all along the same kind of line, same kind of theme.
So, Julie, thank you so much for your question. So, yes, our artists do tend to attract a crowd, and so we've had a few people definitely watching from the rim, James, and shouting out questions as well. So if you do hear some background noise, it is from some nice onlookers. And it's been fun, though. It's been fun to see everyone interact with the artists, too, because this is a very different concept.
They're about 50 feet away, though, up on the bluff way above us.
Yeah, we're pretty tucked away, so that way we can make sure that we're keeping with social distancing. But then also James has some space, so then he can really work with the piece and make sure that he's capturing what he wants. And so I know photography is a hobby of yours as well. Do you sometimes use an image to paint from, or do you prefer to paint on site?
I prefer to paint on site as much as I can. The biggest I'll actually paint plein air is about a 36 by 48, I think is the biggest I've painted plein air. And I'll do fairly regularly pieces 24 by 30 plein air, 18 by 24 pretty commonly. But there's a lot of times where things just happen so fast, and the weather's changing, light's changing rapidly. I think I mentioned earlier something about a peregrine falcon, and they're just the most incredible animals. And actually there was one out here just yesterday. I didn't see it, but I heard it, ketchup, 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 making their little call. I don't think they're saying ketchup, and I'm not sure if they just really like tomato-based condiments, or they're like, because they only say that to their mate. Male talking to female or vice versa, or if they're saying ketchup, ketchup, come on in. But they are super fast. They fly at over 240 miles per hour. They're the fastest creatures on Earth. And they'll fly a couple of thousand feet above the canyon rim and then dive down in and pursuing other birds in flight at that incredible speed. And they're just unbelievably beautiful and stunning to watch at that amazing speed. And so sometimes I rely on my photography of wildlife, fleeting weather events and things, but I've also even painted peregrines in flight and just done very quick little studies. I've done a number of paintings. First year I was here actually for Grand Canyon Celebration of Art during the quick draw. A California condor happened to land right in front of me on the focal point of my painting. There's a bluff in the foreground, and I painted it into the painting. And so every year I've painted some sort of raptors to some degree and been able to paint them and see them. So they don't stay very long, so sometimes I've got to rely on other stuff, but I am still doing the best I can to use plein air references, and I only paint from photographs that I've personally taken, so I have a personal memory of the experience, and I can only use the photograph that way as a frame of reference. But I really prefer to use the paint that I produce on site as my primary reference.
So this question is from Julie, and so she's curious about how many hours or days does it usually take you to spend, or how much time do you usually work on a painting?
Well, it depends on the painting, it depends on the size. So most plein air pieces are done in one session within 2 hours. So this piece would take me typically about 2 hours to complete. This is a 10 by 20 inch piece. I did one about the same amount of time yesterday morning at Grandview Point area, or kind of near it. I was off on the sideways, kind of tucked away. And that was an 8 by 24. The quick draw that we have here is a 2 hour window of time. And we can start at 8 a.m., finish at 10 a.m. This year we're not doing it, by the way, due to the COVID. But during that time, I generally do a 12 by 24 piece. But a really large studio piece that's going to be either requiring multiple sessions plein air, or if it's a strict full studio piece, can take months to paint, and especially if I'm doing anything really complicated, requiring layers, glazing, scumbling, and that can take me. And then there's also the whole start to finish thing between actually painting a painting versus what's required in coming up with what I'm going to do for a painting. So I might have an idea, like especially for commissions. People commission me for a scene. I'll go out to that particular location at the time of year they're looking for, do a series of studies, do some photography, run those by the client, and then they'll usually settle in on something, and that requires a mock-up, and then showing that to the client, and then ordering all the materials and supplies. And for a big painting that's like 50 by 80, then it takes a while to get all the materials, supplies, and then ultimately might take a month to paint a painting that size. Once I figured it all out, so that can take a year from start to finish to get to that point. I just did a really large commission for the Mormon Temple in Sacramento, and that was about, it wasn't quite a year, but it was a long process to do that one. So.
And this question is coming in from Regina, and she was curious, do you only paint landscapes?
No, I paint all sorts of stuff. For my pieces here that you can see online that are currently posted, there's the catalog piece, studio piece, which is a peregrine falcon in flight over the canyon from out at Yavapai. And then I have a Dene Navajo dancer on the rim of the canyon. And so I do a fair amount of wildlife and figurative work as well. And I think that figurative work is hugely important for becoming a good landscape painter, because you can fudge the shapes in a landscape and make all sorts of adjustments and nobody's going to really notice. But if you're trying to paint a human being right in front of you, it's really obvious when somebody's face is distorted, or their proportions aren't right, or symmetrical, or their limbs are wrong. And so a lot of the best artists that I know that are landscape painters have also all done a lot of figure work, and I've done literally hundreds and hundreds of figure paintings from live models, and that has all been very important for everything that I paint.
All right, we have a question coming in from Dana, and she's being completely honest in that she is not an expert about painting, and so she's curious about the little buckets that you are continuing to use. Do you mind sharing what those are for the non-artist clan?
It's walnut oil and a really highly refined odorless mineral spirits by a company called Gamblin. It's called Gamsol. And one is just to make the paint a bit more fluid, and then also just to help rinse the brush. And so I don't use any solvent indoors. I only use oil paint. So I actually, even when I'm using a large canvas and painting a really large studio piece, I will paint it outside in the parking lot of my studio. And for the first lay-in stages where I'm thinning the paint, and then work indoors on the latter stages of the painting when I don't need any solvent. And the reason for using solvent in an oil painting is to thin the paint, and there's a rule for artists that are painting with oils that you always have to paint what's called fat over lean, meaning every successive layer of paint has to have more oil content than the layer below it. So one way to do that is to thin the early layers of the painting and then work straight from the tube later on, and then you can even add additional oil and sparing smaller quantities later on in the painting.
That's fascinating. Thank you for that explanation. And so what we'll do now is, for those of you guys that just joined, we got a couple new folks in. We are live from the south rim of Grand Canyon National Park with celebration of our artist James McGrew. And what we're going to do now is I'm going to sign off from the live, but we will make sure to post a finished photo of his painting, so you guys can check that out as well. And then we'll make sure that we link to the site, so if you guys are interested in purchasing one of James's pieces, you can bid for it on the online auction or participate it from the online store next week. And so really quick before I just sign off, we did just get another question in. Judith was curious, do you only paint in oil?
No, I've used lots of different mediums over the years. I used to paint mostly in pastels. However, galleries were constantly asking me to give them oils because they can sell them easier for higher dollar value, and they don't have to deal with the glass that we have to do with pastel painting. And so it's just a much more versatile, much more direct medium in terms of, the amount of things I can do with oil paint. So I can make the paint thin, I can work it like watercolors, thin and transparent. I can work very thick and opaque. I can add resins to the paint to make it long and ropey, and I can make it really sticky, so I can layer upon layer even within a single session. And so or I can make it very, very slippery. So there's all sorts of things I can do to modify the texture of the oil paint, and then I can leave all these paints in my palette, just keep the palette cool, And so in my studio, I have a big deep freezer, and I just throw my whole palette and brushes in the freezer. I don't ever really clean my brushes. I just rinse them in oil, put them in a bag, and throw them in the freezer. Same with the palette, and that way I can keep reusing everything, and nothing really goes to waste. And if I'm working a big piece and I need it to stay wet for days on end, or even weeks or months on end, I'll put it in the big deep freezer as well. And no other medium really allows that. In addition, oils have a very high refractive index, meaning the light bends sharply when it hits the surface, and it creates an optical depth and illusion that you can't get with any other medium, especially one then vinyl varnished with a high refractive index varnish.
All right. So for those of you guys that were watching today, we are bringing Celebration of Art updates all throughout the week. So we are going to be live again tomorrow morning with Linda Glover-Gooch, probably around 9 a.m. so that way you guys can see views of the South Rim, but then also hear from more of our Celebration of Art artists. Until then, thank you guys so much for tuning in, for watching live, and we'll make sure we go back and comment in the links as well. Hope you guys all have a great day. Thank you.